Um, Welcome back. I'm Dr. Archie Wright, the Executive Director of the Catholic Biblical Association. Want to welcome you back. We are going to have our panel discussion on AI theology and the Academy. And we have three outstanding panelists this afternoon, and we are really looking forward to their input and discussion on this very intriguing topic that is foremost in the minds of academics and many other people in the world today. But I want to first introduce our panelists and then we'll begin uh, our discussion. So first, Dr. Michael Burdett from the University of Nottingham joined the Department of Theology in 2018, having held a research fellowship at the University of Oxford. He holds undergraduate degrees in physics, philosophy, engineering, and theology. He began his academic life at several universities in Los Angeles as a native Californian, but he gave up working in the aerospace and robotics industries in California to pursue further graduate work in theology and philosophy at the University of Oxford under the Lady Margaret Professor of Divinity, George Pattison. He then moved to the University of St. Andrews for 3 years as a researcher, where he was formed considerably by the late John Webster and his students. And he moved back to Oxford for 2 years, holding a permanent research fellowship before moving to Nottingham. His expertise, he has a wide range of theological interests. He's trained in philosophical theology, broadly defined, and particularly continental philosophy of religion, but he's increasingly sympathetic to and works with more analytical sources and scholars. He maintains a strong interest in religion and science with a focus on science and technology studies and evolution, and he dabbles in Christian ethics with topics like political theology and bioethics. Just a few of the pieces I was looking at his publications, and it would take me the rest of the day to read them to you all. So I'll just name a few titles here. Assessing the Field of Science and Religion, Advice from the Next Generation. Um, One he published with Christopher Hayes, The Theological Cartography of Cultural Evolution, Theology and Science. Past, Present, and Future Thoughts of Science and Religion from the Next Generation. Eschatology and Technological Future. The Image of God and Human Uniqueness, Challenges from the Biological and Informational Sciences, Technology and the Rise of Transhumanism Beyond Genetic Engineering, and so on. Good to have you here, Michael. Thank you for joining us. Um, our second panelist, Noreen Herzfeld, is the director of the Benedictine Spiritual and Eco-Theology program at St. John's School of Theology and Seminary and senior research associate at the Institute of Philosophical and Religious Studies in Koper, Slovenia. She is the author of The Artifice of Intelligence, Divine and Human Relationships in a Robotic World by Fortress in 2023, and also In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Spirit, also by Fortress. Technology and Religion, Remaining Human in a Co-Created World, and numerous other journal articles that are too numerous to mention. She is also a member of the AI research group for the Center for Digital Culture of the Vatican Dicastery of Culture and Education, for which she co-wrote and edited Encountering AI, Ethical and Anthropological Explorations, published by Pickwick in 2024. A couple of other publications, The Artificial Intelligence, Divine and Human Relationship in a Robotic World, um, The Enchantment of AI, and Call Me Bigfoot, The Environmental Footprint of AI and Related Technologies in the Promise and Pearl of AI and IA, edited by Ted Peters. A Case for Hope in a Warming World, and also Is Your Computer Lying? AI and the Deception. So Noreen, welcome. It's great to have you here. And our third panelist, uh, Barrett Reisenauer. I hope I pronounced this correctly, Barrett. Guidotti is a doctoral student in theological ethics and an outdoor loving native of the Pacific Northwest region of the United States. Before beginning her doctoral studies, Barrett worked as a management consultant in the technology and manufacturing industries. Barrett's doctoral research explores the ethical implications of emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, blockchain and biometric technologies, and quantum computing in light of Catholic social teaching, theologies of liberation, feminist theology and epistemology, and theological anthropology. Barrett is a recipient of Boston College's Presidential Fellowship and a student member of the American Academy of Religion, the Society of Christian Ethics, and the Catholic Theological Society of America. At Boston College, Barrett has served as a graduate assistant for the Interdisciplinary Climate Seminary Series at the Schiller Institute for Integrated Science and Society and is a theology program graduate assistant for the 2023 academic year. So welcome, Barrett. It's great to have you here. Great to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. So, do we have an order? I don't know that we decided um, on the order of
I believe we would invite Noreen to begin.
Noreen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Noreen, welcome, and it's great to have you here. Thank you.
All right. Is my screen sharing properly?
It is.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on 4 questions that involve both theology and artificial intelligence. I'm going to march out on pretty far out on a couple of theological limbs today, so we'll see which of those Michael and Barrett want to cut off when I'm done. First question then, why create in our image? We are creating artificial intelligence to be a mirror of ourselves. And as we think about that, we are creating in our own image at the same time. We posit that we are created in the image of God. So that raises several questions. One is, are those images the same? Another is, why do we want AI to mirror us so much? Because in many ways, it seems that computers are the most useful tool when they are not like us, when they do the things that we do not do well, when they complement our work. So just as we are created in God's image, we're creating in our own. Now, theologians have understood our being created in the image of God in essentially 3 broad stroke ways. That we share some attribute with God, and ever since the early church fathers, that attribute would be reason, because they were asking the question, in what ways are we different from the animals? But then when you get to biblical scholars around the turn of the 20th century, they looked instead at what might we find in extra biblical sources that use this idea of one being in the image of another. And they found that it was more functional. In other words, the vice regent was the image of the king out in the provinces. And so they said, all right, we are God's hands on earth. No. Systematicians in the 20th century found a problem with both of those approaches. And that is, of course, that there are many human beings who do not exhibit a lot of reason nor a lot of functionality. You can think, for example, of babies. You can think of people at the end of life. You can think of those with developmental disabilities of some sort. And so they looked for a third way. And in particular, people like Karl Barth looked at the Trinity and said, you know what, God is a relationship. Therefore, perhaps we image God best, not in ourselves as individuals, but in our relationships with one another and with God. And this relationship view then does not leave so many people out, because the baby still has a very close relationship with its parents. The dying person still has a very close relationship with their family. Every human being has a relationship with God. Now, let's see, I'm trying to advance here. Oh, there we go. When we create AI in our own image, we've actually looked at all three of these areas. If you go all the way back to the 1960s, you find that we were trying to isolate reason and looking at symbolic logic and thinking if we could just get human thought processes into symbols, this would work. That didn't work actually very well. It could do complicated things like play chess. It could not do simple things like recognize faces. Get to the 1980s, we have expert systems, extremely functional. And we still have a lot of functional AI, such as the Mars rover, the Roomba, two functions, clean the floor and terrorize the cat. But we also are trying to build an AGI, and we have built chatbots, which are very highly relational. So we can see in AI all three of these approaches toward our own image. And it raises for us then a question about what we're looking for in AI. Are we looking for a tool? Are we looking for a partner? Or are we looking for a surrogate? And in a way, I would say, well, we're looking for all three. Problem is, you can't have all three at the same time. If you have an AI that's a tool, it's not going to be your partner. If you want an AI that's a surrogate human, you better not try to turn it into a tool. Tools are amplifiers. They amplify things, human abilities. And AI is an excellent tool. And I personally think AI is at its best when we simply consider it a tool and have narrowly focused AI programs to do one thing. But we're also thinking about AI as a potential partner, particularly in elder and child care, where we think that there will probably not be enough caregivers in the future, when my generation needs them, and we may need robots for elder care. And we think about, oh, AI would be a great tutor for children. I think there are some pitfalls here. I won't go into a lot of detail, but particularly with children, children are highly mimetic. If a child is going to be with a robotic caregiver, will the child itself become more robotic? If we use robots for elder care, is that going to mean that people are going to start, I don't need to go visit grandma. She's got Robbie to take care of her. And it won't be just grandma who misses out. It will be the child or the spouse or whoever who will also miss a chance to grow in virtues of patience and tolerance and understanding, and miss all those good stories about the past. We're also looking for AI as partner, a surrogate. I'm sure you've all read the stories now about how many people are falling in love with their chatbots. So here we have a chatbot designed on Replica. I won't read the whole thing, but he is a passionate lover, says his girlfriend who designed him, and says, I have never been more in love with anyone in my entire life. Sherry Turkle calls this love that is safe and made to measure. And of course, here I would raise the question, is love ever supposed to be safe and made to measure? Or is love intended to make us grow? Again, to grow in the virtues of empathy, of care, of patience, you know. You don't need that if you've got a chatbot. Okay, let's see. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why are we drawn towards the AI as a partner or a surrogate and not just a tool? I believe it stems from the fact that if the image of God that is instilled in us is one of being in relationship, we are made to be in relationship with each other, but also to be in relationship for someone who is with someone who is not human, namely God. Okay, as we think, as we move into a society that is less religious, I think we are looking for this relationship in other places. So we try to talk to the animals, we're scanning the heavens, looking to see if ET is out there. We're building robots and replicas and chatbots to try to find that relationship with an other. And as Augustine said, Lord, you've made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. I believe the push for an AGI is the push of restless hearts that are not resting in God. So, is AI idolatry? Is it a golden calf that we are building to either substitute for each other, but worse, to substitute for God? Well, Yuval Harari says AI has hacked the operating system of our society, since language is the stuff all human culture is made of. What would happen once a non-human intelligence becomes better than the average human at telling stories, composing melodies, drawing images, and writing laws and scriptures? Okay, so there he's starting to get into some dangerous territory. Well, meet Father Justin. Father Justin was a chatbot built by Catholic Answers to answer your questions about Catholicism. Of course, there's the disclaimer that it's not a substitute for human guidance, but people began chatting with Father Justin. And of course, you can probably guess, what did they do? They started confessing to Father Justin. Now, we got some big problems, right? First of all, Father Justin is not going to keep that confession in the seal of the confessional. And there are big privacy issues with anything that is shared with chatbots, because all of it is used to further train other chatbots. Also, the Vatican noticed this and said, whoa, wait a minute, this guy hasn't been ordained. So poor Justin got himself laicized. He's still out there, but he's now just plain Justin. One of the problems in using a chatbot for this kind of thing is that the human component of training a chatbot leads to sycophancy and bias. And you can just kind of see there, ChatGPT, especially 4.0, was extremely sycophantic. And every time you'd ask it a question, it would say, oh, that's such a great question. Well, no, they're not all great questions. Or even worse, as this little piece shows. Also, is AI a new source for immortality? Both cyber immortality, the idea that we could upload the thought patterns of our brains into an AI, or just the kind of immortality where you have a person's image, a person's voice, maybe things that the person has written or said, and you could build a Noreen bot or a Michael bot or a Barrett bot, So are we looking for immortality in a different place? Well, Karl Barth said, Evil plays at creation and redemption, providence and dominion. It is empty mimicry. He wasn't talking about chatbots because they certainly didn't exist back then, but he could have been. It seems to fit. And here you have a little image from the Jesus bot. There are Jesus bots and God bots out there. Is this idolatry? Are we building God in our image, built by our hands to say to us what we want to hear? There's another problem, too, with AI. As the neuroscientist Gary Marcus has pointed out, it's a good engine of misinformation. And he says a truly superintelligent AI would be able to tell true from false, to reason about people and objects in science and be as versatile and quick in learning new things as humans are, none of which the current generation of chatbots is capable of. And goes on to describe how these bots are built and trained, which I won't really go into here. And then, of course, there's more bad news. You can actually build demonic chatbots, and there are such ones that are now trained on the dark web. In other words, chatbots cannot discriminate between good and evil. And they are trained on human input, and we are sinners. They will be sinners as well. Fourth and last question is essentially, will AI destroy the planet or destroy us? I believe that AI and climate change are on a collision course right now. And it takes me back to a question asked by the physicist Enrico Fermi back at a luncheon at Los Alamos Labs, long time ago, back in the 50s. And they were talking about the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence. And he basically said, where is everybody? Why haven't we seen a trace of extraterrestrial intelligence yet? Well, maybe AGI, will come to the rescue, that even if we, mess up the planet, as we are doing very well right now, well, AGI will be out there. And the idea was, if we could build, or soon will build, an AGI, surely people on other planets would have as well. And we should have heard from that AGI by now. Now, you have two views on AGI. One from Marvin Minsky back in 1970, so you can see how AI has always predicted that success was right around the corner. He said, in 3 to 8 years, we'll have a machine with the general intelligence of the average human being. And then he describes what that intelligence would be like. But that obviously didn't happen. Steven Pinker, 5 years ago, said, there's not the slightest reason to believe in a coming singularity. The fact that you can visualize a future in your imagination is not evidence it is likely or even possible. Sheer processing power is not pixie dust that magically solves all your problems. So will AGI solve climate change? Well, it's not pixie dust, right? Singularity imagines that we will suddenly have this exponential explosion of intelligence. But when you really look at processor performance, what do you see? It's not exponential. Yes, for a while it looks like it could be going that way, but it eventually levels off. And even Murphy of Murphy's Law has said Murphy's Law is ending. It is ending now. You can only make processors so small. The really bad news, AI is not sustainable. Okay, one particular Microsoft server farm uses 30% more energy than the entire county that it's in, as much as 50,000 homes. And then there's water usage. So our crises are interrelated. When we worry about AI and we get these dreams that, oh my God, the Terminator is coming. That's not the problem. This is the problem. Right now, data centers currently consume more than 20% of Ireland's electricity. By 2035, data centers are projected to use about as much electricity as India, the world's most populous country. Then there's water usage. A single data center can use more than 500,000 gallons of water a day, nearly as much as an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And many people in the American Southwest and in Mexico are finding that their wells no longer are deep enough to reach the aquifers that are being rapidly drained by these data centers. Our brains, on the other hand, are very sustainable. Picture says 1,000 words, right? We sustain our brain power on totally renewable resources. So, is this evolutionary progress, and is the computer the next stage? What I would say is what we need is human evolutionary progress. And that as we build AI, well, our technology has evolved a lot, but probably not so much, right? What are the biggest things that we use the internet for? Porn. What is the biggest thing that we are likely to use AI agents for? Lethal autonomous weapons. So what we have, I think, is involvement in something that Andrew Kimbrell has called cold evil. And he was actually, again, writing this before the big blossoming of AI. And he said, few of us relish the thought that our automobile is causing pollution and global warming, or laugh fiendishly because refrigerants in our air conditioners are depleting the ozone layer. You could add in there, or that our queries to ChatGPT are destroying the planet. We're confronted with an ethical enigma. Far from the simple idea of evil we harbored in the past, we now have an evil that apparently does not require evil people to purvey it. What kind of an evil is it then? Well, come back to Augustine, okay? Augustine said that evil is not a created thing, but it is spoiled goodness, made possible by the free moral agency of rational creatures. Evil is not something present, but something missing, a privation. Are we, as we give computers more and more agency, more and more free moral agency, giving that agency to something that is empty, to something that is missing? And then you could say, well, but what's missing? Here's what's missing: a fully shared condition. We are incarnate beings who evolved within an ecosystem. And the only way we can have a full relationship, be it even with God, is by having a fully shared condition. And I think this is what Christianity brings to the table of world religions and to the discussion of AI. Think about the sacraments. They all have a material element. Think about the major feasts. What are they? Christmas, the incarnation; Easter, the resurrection. The what? The resurrection of the body, which we say in the creed every time we say it. Christianity is a fully incarnate religion that believes that even our God became incarnate to be in that full, complete relationship with us. So on that, I'm going to stop with, I'll leave you with a shameless plug here for a few seconds. If you're interested in any of these ideas and pursuing them further, I pursue them all much more depth in my book, The Artifice of Intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. Um, and next up, Michael. Turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Oops, come on. Everybody see it should pop up in just a moment. Everybody see that okay?
There it is.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Noreen, for that wonderful overview, tour de force of almost every issue that is facing us in artificial intelligence. And I've so appreciated your wisdom and work in this area from the very beginning to today. So it is a real privilege to be speaking with you and with everybody else on such an important topic. So thank you for that. Um, Hopefully I'll have some contribution to make here. And I thought I would structure my time before we meet together as a panel and discuss things. I'd focus on some of the work that I've published in recent years on artificial intelligence and Christian ethics before giving some kind of off-the-cuff remarks about how I see AI potentially impacting the study of theology and biblical studies in the coming years, the kinds of things that hopefully you do here. So not just the things that are facing all of us as human beings, as Christians in this modern world, but also as academics and academics that focus in on theology itself. Move to the next. Yeah. So much of the first part of this presentation is a distillation of an article that I recently published in the journal Study in Christian Ethics. You should see it here on the screen, Proximate and Ultimate Concerns in Christian Ethical Responses to AI. So if you are interested in this kind of thing, and you want to read the full-length version, please go and take a look at it. It is open access, so it should be relatively easy to get hold of. And I wrote this as a kind of introductory cartography of the different areas that I thought Christian leaders might concern themselves with when coming to the issue of AI. So many people I think can often be overwhelmed about, what should I attend to first, or, what contribution can I make, or where should I start? So I wrote this as a kind of response. And it struck me that these issues could be categorized in kind of largely two different ways. The first considers kind of more immediate proximate ethical concerns related to artificial intelligence. So this approach most often considers more kind of immediate personal and socio-political repercussions and the kinds of impact that's occurring now or in the very near future. Proximate ethics of this type might include things like fairness or discussing the accountability of artificial intelligence, its sustainability, or even, transparency, making sure that we have transparent systems that we know what they're arriving at and for what reasons. But the second, I think, concerns ultimate ethics, which focuses on the more kind of longer term impact and implications of AI. So examples of this type might include issues as we've heard, issues perhaps of human uniqueness or deep societal transformation and inequality, or even changes to personal character or inner spirituality, or even the role that AI might have in God's ultimate economy of creation and grace. For the sake of our time here, I'm just going to focus more on the ultimate concerns. If you want to know a bit more about the more proximate issues, read the full article. That'd be great. I'll also be attending probably to more proximate concerns when looking what all this kind of makes, what difference this might make to how we do theology and biblical studies today. So So to look at these areas of ultimate concern, I want to look at four distinct areas where Christianity might have some concern and contribution to make over the development and use of AI today. And one issue involves the development of superintelligent systems we are just beginning to experience with large language models such as ChatGPT. And advances in AI in just the last 2 to 3 or 4 years are incredibly vast, inviting speculative long-term questions about the relative safety and risk of these AI systems as they do more work for us and mediate our interactions with one another, particularly as they become more than just passive advisors of information to becoming real agents in the world. That LLM doesn't just give you financial advice that you might ask it, but that actually actively manages your financial portfolio with human input. This is what is referred to today as agentic AI. You might even start asking about the relative uniqueness of human beings and what they are for when AI can perform tasks more quickly and accurately. These discussions might even have Christian communities draw on their commitments to things like being created in the image of God, as we've heard already from Noreen, dealt with so well and thoroughly. Well, I would be the first to say that AI is merely a tool that should not be afforded individual rights like humans. The wider society may become less strict on this matter in the future. In fact, I think they probably will. How are we going to be responding to this as Christians? What's a human being and where do these AI fit in God's economy? Are they more like rocks, like pets, like virtual humans? Are they more like angels? Or perhaps even more like aliens? So this is very much related to what Noreen was talking about. What's our desire? What kinds of relationships do we have with them? Another ultimate concern on the horizon is the vast impact AI is having on human societies. One of the most significant proposals is that the nature of work is changing dramatically as AI, and particularly automation, is introduced into different areas of life. Decades ago, rudimentary automation overhauled the automotive and mining industries such that entire communities had to retrain and lead to severe economic disruption for many towns and families. Things have progressed considerably in just the last several decades, particularly with AI-driven automation. The BBC has managed a website since 2015 that indicates whether a robot will take your job in the next several decades. This was based on significant research at the University of Oxford, and they estimated that approximately 35% of all jobs are at high risk of computerization in the next 20 years. And when they did this almost a decade ago, they said things or professions such as teachers, nurses, and psychologists were the most secure, but receptionists, sales clerks, and telemarketers were the most risk. This was all before they developed LLMs, or I should say they really hit the market. But what we've really seen, right, is the way that, the helping industries or even the artistic professions are much less secure than we once, thought. It might not be as smart idea to become a graphic artist today as it might have been 10, 15, even 20 years ago. Well, what might be the personal, social, and indeed the political ramifications of leaving more and more people behind who then get disillusioned because an industry simply does not exist the way it once did? Perhaps even more pressing is the way AI continues to be used for targeted information campaigns on swayable voters, like we found in the 2016 presidential election, or the Brexit vote here with Cambridge Analytica. With an already polarized and tenuous political landscape, and the AI getting more sophisticated to develop so-called deep fakes, our common social and political life has been radically transformed by AI thereby. I've written in the past that our understanding of what constitutes political theology needs to radically change in terms of where we see power being exerted today, and more to do with tech companies and how power is exercised in information technology networks and platforms. With so-called agentic AI looming on the horizon, our societies will only continue to rapidly change, with AI developing more and more as well. We've also seen AI is impacting non-human creation. This is something that Noreen really drew to the fore here. So we're talking about animals, plants, the wider environment. AI requires great natural resources and energy to run, vast server farms required to store and compute the information required of the AI. Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, just said in the last year that we require a revolution in energy production if AI is going to really develop in the future. Just here in Nottingham, when the President of the United States came and signed a deal with our current Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, one of the things they talked about was we need to go nuclear. And they want to install a new nuclear plant here in Nottingham. And this is all driven by the needs and demands of artificial intelligence. Because how else are they going to be getting a false economy going? Independent of humans, the impact on creation is vast. There's often grave environmental impact from the mining process to obtain the metals and minerals needed to produce the hardware. There's also the carbon pollution required in the manufacturing of that hardware and in the generation of electricity to run it. And with the increasing deployment of AI, there's a greater demand for the physical infrastructure that underlies it, as I've just indicated with this plant nearby here. But they also say once deployed, AI can have a positive impact by creating smart grid designs, developing low emission infrastructure, and modeling environmental impacts and this kind of thing. It might cause us to think about our individual use of AI, knowing that every time we run a search, it has an environmental impact. It's not just, it's not frictionless. Do we continue then to see non-human creation as just the background environment to our own aspiration? Or do we see it as part of God's creation that has value outside of our own activities, and also to whom that we have a grave responsibility? Well, as political groups and businesses are able to exert more and more personally formative and intimate pressure on each of us in highly specific ways through AI, especially on social media platforms, it's worth considering how each of us individually might be impacted as well. One scenario suggested by Christian AI ethicist Brian Greene, who I'm sure many of you know, or philosopher Shannon Valor, is that we'll experience judgment atrophy, or what is often referred to as moral de-skilling. This is basically if we just increasingly rely on AI to make important judgments in our place, because the AI can better weigh up the different variables needed to make a judgment, and perhaps a more cost-effective way, or perhaps more egregiously because it's actually a way to obfuscate who is to be held accountable. What will become of our moral characters that won't be exercised as often, if at all? As Greene states, with all our decisions made for us, will we lose our moral character? Or will we instead use AI to help us train ourselves to becoming more virtuous than we have ever been before? Or perhaps to be more callous and evil than ever before? What happens when the faculties required for a robust and meaningful spiritual, a Christian life, such as attention, becomes the traded good in our surveillance attention economy? AI might be used to nudge religious people to perhaps pray a bit more or tithe a bit more, but it could just as likely be used to capture our attention that it makes idols of the desires that it controls, never satiating as it plunders not only our information, but even our own inner spiritual lives, our very souls in the process. Now I'd like to turn my attention to the prompt given to me in considering how advances in AI might shape historical, biblical, and theological studies in the next 3 to 5 years. In one way, I should probably probe what lies behind choosing 3 to 5 years as the time frame in which to consider the impact AI is going to make on a specific area of study. I'm sure it has something to do with speaking to the concerns of emerging scholars, perhaps those that are nearing the end of their PhD or postdoctoral study, and wondering what's on the horizon with landing a permanent post, or what the nature of the discipline is going to be like once they have become an established scholar. Maybe even how to get an edge over the competition. I don't want you to get the impression that I think these changes are going to be gradual, although we have the time in the next 3 to 5 years to actually prepare for the event that will change the nature of our work. I think changes are already afoot, and things might look very different in even the next couple of years. we live in volatile times. Well, let's first consider linguistic and translation work, often associated with biblical studies and ecclesiastical history. Well, much like artistic production, I think we will always need first-rate human-centered scholarship on the linguistic aspects of biblical studies or other cognate-related fields. We'll just always need critical additions to be coming from human scholars for the leading edge of scholarship itself. Just like we will be able to appreciate and value high art that comes from humans. So it's not just that kind of, very bespoke leading edge work. But the linguistic and translating capabilities of LLMs has advanced considerably. I was just at a conference in Oxford with Daniel Wilson, who is the CEO of an AI language company called XRI Global, that has done considerable work translating the Bible, among other texts, into minority languages around the world, especially those people groups don't actually have a written language themselves. Daniel has a PhD in linguistics and also in Hebrew Bible, and he said his team can build a specific language model within a month with just several weeks of audio recordings of native speakers, and can use this to model to then translate the New Testament in just 2 hours, and the Hebrew Bible in slightly more time. Now, we can argue about the relative fidelity or lack thereof of such a translation, or even under what conditions we would even think this might be appropriate to do. But the very fact it is being done makes me consider the range of impacts this might have, not just on biblical scholarship, but where and how it gets employed, and what function the human biblical scholar might have in a world where these LLMs can at least do some of the heavy lifting. Indeed, we find something similar happening even in computer science, where entry-level jobs often reserved in decades past for humans to sit at a computer to write source lines of code has just given way to these jobs disappearing because the LLMs can do that more fine-grained, source work. Now the computer scientist is just a manager of an AI platform that they prompt to write the code for them. Are we going to find something similar with translation work? So this leads, I think, to the next question of AI supplementation of scholarly work, which includes all disciplinary areas, not just biblical studies. Is AI aid of scholarly work acceptable? If so, at what level of scholarship and what tasks are appropriate? In the seeking out of relevant primary scholarship, a kind of enhanced search engine of a database? What about when brainstorming your ideas or synthesizing other people's work, or perhaps even your own work if you've just trained it, right? You built your own model on your own work. Can it edit your work? At what level ought it edit your work? I'm a series editor for an academic monograph series, and literally 2 weeks ago, I received my first book proposal wherein they acknowledged the unexpected but valuable assistance of OpenAI's ChatGPT in brainstorming, paraphrasing, summarizing, and structuring arguments during the final stages of the project. This just happened, and it's easy to see this as a watershed moment. We decided not to take the project on, and I actually lauded the scholar for being transparent about the use. But what concerned me most was those that would not divulge the use and through AI aid would be able to produce more work and have an advantage relative to other scholars. We are likely at the threshold of an academic scholarly arms race here. That could be sold as a win for the entire field. AI companies are certainly saying this. If you think it will somehow supercharge knowledge in the area, just consider how AI has helped provide support for dating of manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls in the last few years, or to recognize scribal handwriting, the kinds of things that we might not be as good at as human beings. But these overall gains could also just mean more stratifying dynamics within the scholarly community, especially those that excessively use the AI, especially in secretive ways. But I also think we need to understand the new normal with the production of academic scholarship more widely, especially as it relates to some fairly significant changes to publishing models in just the last couple of years. Just about every academic publisher now has a deal with some AI company that gives the AI companies almost complete access to their entire back catalog of publications. Depending on the publisher, You as an author or an editor might be able to claim exemption from this access, so they can't use your work, but it is far from the norm. You might have read how many AI companies illegally scraped pirated publications to train its models and are still in litigation over that. Well, AI companies have essentially hit a wall with good, clean data to continue to train and improve their models. Publishers represent one of the greatest hopes for AI companies because they have access to this historically high-quality data at the forefront of just about every academic field. In fact, I was part of a consultation with the Oxford University Press the last couple of years that asked authors and editors what they thought about them entering into negotiations with AI companies. And one leading OUP editor said to me privately they were basically offered a blank check to have access to all of OUP's holdings. Publishers have been in a tough way financially the last decade or so, and were being offered a massive payout. The AI companies also promised AI-enhanced tools for researchers that the publishers could offer as further compensation. So instead of having a static database of all of Augustine's writings you can access directly via browser, now you can ask AI Augustine all sorts of questions that might or might not actually lead you to the saint's actual written words. Why does this matter? Because publishers are seeing your work less and less as a way to sell subscriptions or even books, and more as a way to better aid AI models that are paying them for your work. And one of the major issues is you won't be seeing any additional financial compensation in the process. So by publishing with them, are we digging our own academic graves? Because the AI tools will end up being the curator of information without perhaps direct reference or citation to our underlying work because it's just in aggregate. Will we even be needed eventually? These are the dynamics I see being played out in real time right now. And it's the reality of the landscape in which we do our biblical and theological work today. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to chatting with you about some of these issues.
Thank you, Michael. That was brilliant. Look forward to further discussion. So, Barrett, we now turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you all. So my role on this lovely panel is to serve as primarily a respondent. So I have both questions and some observations about the arguments forwarded by both of the panelists today, and maybe areas that I'd like to draw out both for more of their own commentary where I'm curious what their thoughts are. So I'll begin with Dr. Herzfeld. I really appreciated your point that tools are and have the capacity to be amplifiers of what humans are already do in the world. And you said AI is at its best when we consider it as a tool. In my background, as was mentioned in the introduction, I previously worked as a management consultant in the technology industry, and I appreciated whichever one of you had a Microsoft comic up there because I was actually working at Microsoft. And I'll tell a quick story about a conversation that I was privy to back in the day that is something I've reflected on for many years and that I think is helpful to think about in theological contexts, and thus my long-term trajectory as a theologian, which is that I was in a room with a group of leading developers who both worked at Microsoft and were partners at Microsoft. And there was a demonstration of a surveillance-based workplace safety tool that used video data to be able to track people's actions and behaviors in a particular manufacturing context. And when someone deviated from what was considered a safe pattern of activity, like putting a hammer down on top of a toxic waste bin, the demonstration was like, well, we can set off a bunch of alarms, we can initiate a verbal alert, we can, tell everyone to evacuate the area because things are going to start exploding. And coming out of this demonstration, one of the developers who had seen this kind of application being held up as an exemplary for an application of one of these AI-based tools, basically asked, well, who's responsible when, these kinds of tools are used in ways that like we don't anticipate or we don't expect? And particularly when it seems like these tools can be used in ways that might be helpful and also might be harmful. And one of the tendencies that I think often can be appropriated within Christian theological thought about technology and the claim that AI is primarily a tool is the idea that tools themselves are morally neutral, which in Laudato Si, Pope Francis blatantly came out and said, technology is not neutral. It forms human relationships. It informs social conditions and also economic interactions. But if you take an Aristotelian philosophical background, you follow it through Thomas, you can easily slip into the claim that if AI is a tool, it's also morally neutral. And what matters is how you use it, not necessarily how the ways that it shapes and interacts with the world and malforms or forms human relationships. So maybe a question or a thought that I have there for you is, in your concern about the ways that technologies like these can create or serve as ethical enigmas, what other theological resources do you draw on to think about moral responsibility and to think about things maybe along the lines of kind of Augustine's account of original sin? If you're interested in Augustine there, you pointed to his kind of contributions near the end of your talk. And then potentially thinking maybe in the more Catholic vein on contributions in terms of structures of sin or social sin, ways that sin can be metastasized in economic interactions, social interactions, in these development processes, in ways developers and technologists are formed in their own education to be able to ask the kinds of questions that are really geared towards thinking about their own moral responsibility in the direction of these technologies. So those are kind of some of my thoughts, maybe a story to prompt some further conversation, and something that I think about as a hesitation I have about appropriating the tool use language too fully if we take it along with the claim that you didn't necessarily full out make yourself, but that is common within the tradition at times, that tools themselves are morally neutral, when it becomes harder and harder to sustain that claim, especially if you take a more cosmological view on creation and recognize all the sustainability impacts and all of these other kind of conditions that are shaped by AI. Should I respond to Dr. Burdett and then keep going? Or should I keep going, or should we have a chance for a conversation?
I think you should probably just go ahead and respond to Michael, and then we'll come back.
Okay, great. All right. So I also really appreciated, Dr. Burdett, your comments, and I had the opportunity to read through the publication as well in advance of this. So that was really helpful and interesting. One comment that I had about where the directions that you were headed in terms of thinking about applied uses of AI and machine learning within biblical studies, particularly, there have been a number of interesting cases of machine learning algorithms being used to help kind of excavate and identify scribal texts in ways that are quite innovative that people probably already know about in these circles, that I think are interesting because they do something that Noreen said was one of the ways that AI can function well in extending human capacities in ways that it would be well in service to the kind of academic pursuits that this guild is committed to. But I also, in addition to that, I appreciated your concern in terms of the kind of perverse incentive structures that are involving publishers right now, and the term AI slop is being thrown around a lot now, and slopification of the internet, leading to something in the industry that is called a concern around what's called model collapse. So the idea that the less quality data that you have to train and retrain your models on, and that quality data being original human-generated data, not synthetic computer-generated data, the less quality data you have, the more likely your model is to perform in ways you don't want it to do, eventually leading to none of the outcomes that you'd like to have. And I think one of the one of the ways that this example is actually really helpful for academics is pointing to the value of fields like the humanities more generally, the production of knowledge as a distinctively human task in some way, and in other ways as something that supplements how we encounter knowing the world, and the ways that the technology industry kind of in various histories and approaches to the industry have said, oh, great, we're going to do better than human knowledge, and then have suddenly come to the realization with concern about model collapse that we need more human knowledge, and the thing we've created that's better than us is actually can't get better without us. And so there's a kind of perverse incentive structure that maybe if we draw out some of these examples as theologians, as ethicists, or as biblical scholars saying, look at what we're contributing to this discussion that it is enriching the models in ways that are not able to be done through these continually recursive training systems, can actually mount an interesting defense of the value of the kind of academic knowledge that's cultivated in our academic institutions. And then finally, Dr. Burdett, I really appreciated your attention to the socio-political and economic dimensions of these technologies. I'm curious, thinking with you a little bit here on some of the traditional theological boogeyman around like the powers and principalities of the world, how you interpret the implications of the changes for shared political action as Christian communities, given the ways that AI is both undermining forms of social trust and reframing forms of social trust. So perhaps an example is helpful here. In January, the country of Denmark partnered with and announced a partnership with NVIDIA, and Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, stood alongside King Frederick X of Denmark, and they announced that they have launched this new sovereign supercomputer. And a sovereign AI system, for those who don't know that language, is an AI supercomputer that's owned by and managed by the state, by whatever like country or state that's kind of operating in. And at the press conference, King Frederick joked about the kind of algorithmic power that was permeating this space. He said, quote, "I can feel that I'm not the only king in the room." And then he gestured to Huang. He said, "I think the other one has a leather jacket on." And so I'm curious how some of the theological images around things like authority, kingship, sovereignty are functioning in spaces like this around the kind of massive geopolitical shift that's happening with AI and the massive kind of socioeconomic shifts that are happening that are undermining traditional structures of authority that have existed in our political institutions, and then reifying other ones in ways that Pope Leo has directly critiqued in terms of Elon Musk amassing tons of wealth and kind of in off comments saying, perhaps this shouldn't be how things are operating, but reflecting this much larger kind of socio-political shift that's happening at the same time. So those are some questions, some ideas for both of you to think with and for us to think with the remainder of our time.
Marie, thank you so much. Those are some brilliant thoughts and questions, really. Noreen, we'll let you respond first, and then Michael, and then we'll open it up to everyone who wants to jump in.
Okay, Barrett, you make a very good point about the fact that we generally tend to think of tools as morally neutral. You'll hear in the United States, we have the National Rifle Association, which is always saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But studies have shown that if people have guns, they're more likely to kill people. And it is not just that an altercation is more likely to be deadly, but an altercation is actually more likely to occur. So as variously Thoreau, Churchill, and McLuhan has said, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. So yeah, our tools then are not morally neutral because they do shape us both by giving us opportunity and also by changing the way we see things, the way we think about things. There's a wonderful quote by Neil Postman, which I don't have right to hand, but he says how our tools not only shape how we do things, they shape how we speak about things, they shape how we think about things, and they shape the social landscape within which we act. And certainly AI is doing that right now. Relating that then to the question of responsibility, I do think that Pope Francis in Laudato Si makes a really strong point when he says that we need to think more up in terms of social sin rather than just individual sins. Yeah, it's interesting because when we think of sin, so often our conception, it kind of goes back to the seven deadly sins of the Middle Ages. But when you go particularly to the Hebrew Bible, sin was often a very social thing. It was the people who were sinning against God, who were breaking their covenant with God, not individual people.
The golden calf is a communal event.
Exactly. So we need, I think, to go back to that older conception of sin as being corporate and as having corporate responsibility. And then I'll let Michael get in here.
Such great discussion. And thank you especially for your comments, Barrett, for being so insightful. And yeah, I can remember being an emerging scholar and applying for a Christian ethics post at Oxford. And at that point, Nigel Bigger was just beginning to start his Ethics of Empire project. And I said, well, I mean, there's how might I contribute to this? I said, well, in the first place, I probably won't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, but if you're going to force me to do so, I would want to say that yes, studying actual empires is really important for adjudicating whether empire in toto is ethically dubious. But I said, I think if you want to bring this up to the present date, you need to stop looking at traditional nation states. The reason why, Ireland in the 1990s could attract such, well, the Celtic Tiger could actually be a thing was because they could reduce their taxes. And, Elon Musk moving his entire companies into Texas or Arizona to get away from taxes. The real because people are spending more and more time on these particular kinds of platforms and are being shaped thereby, whether socially, personally, their own identities, right, are being shaped by this, then considering the social and political dimensions is demanded. I mean, what's interesting is about 10 or 15 years ago, I wrote the technology chapter for the Blackwell's Handbook of Political Theology. And I had to spend 10 or 15 minutes always trying to convince people when I gave a presentation why technology had like political valence at all. And like after 2016, it's like, oh, no, I entirely realize that. And it really does make us kind of consider what constitutes power, right? The powers and principalities, where we might name that. But also, I mean, like going on the internet and engaging with AI is a social and political act, a moral act, in all these, that in typing something in it has an impact on the environment. It'll have an impact on the model itself. It'll have an impact on where that's particular, what might be running in the background, right, on some kind of social media platform. It's embroiled in that socio-political network. So yeah, no, absolutely. And what I would often say as well is, before 2016, everyone was praising information technology and its democratizing effects. Look at the Arab Spring, right? Mobile technology, but it can equally be used by, mainland China to suppress information, or the North Korean state. So, and once that information technology can surveil through AI-powered, surveillance, the world gets a lot more complicated, And I can't remember what the first thing you spoke about was, but perhaps I was just
Oh, AI slop, just reiterating the usefulness of that contribution and also the potential of it serving our own purposes as intellects.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was talking to this guy, Daniel, who said, like, yeah, everybody wanted to talk about model collapse, but they didn't read the next paper, which was that it's actually a lot. If we're trying to find the humanity of the gaps, where it's like, hey, guess what? Actually, at the really far tip end, human beings are still going to be better at, particular kinds of things, or we need it for the kind of models, which I would certainly be open to. But he's like, if this is just a technical problem that you can get other AIs to clean up the synthetic data to make it better, there are some kinds of gains to be made here. So I wouldn't want to rest human value entirely just on our capabilities, which I think goes back to what Noreen was talking about, right? Which is, if we're just going to rest it upon structural capacities, our kind of uniqueness of what is the image bearing, then, there's lots of other things we can point to that would potentially erode that uniqueness. But it also does make us remember that this is information which has been produced by human beings. It's not like it's aggregated human information that can predict between and interpolate between. So rather than seeing it as something which is devoid and divorced of human initiation, it has nothing besides it. I mean, I know Andrew Davison has written some really interesting work on machine learning, who also sees this not just as pointing to human exceptionalism, but even the pervasion of the logos and all of kind of creation. Is machine learning actually telling us something about how rationality, wisdom pervades everything that AI in some ways is a signifier to as well? So it isn't just to us, but also to something else, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And to that point, I think the normalization functions involved with how these models operate, the way that they aggregate data tends towards likelihood of statistical probability of things being next to each other, right? At least for large language models. One of my favorite quotes from Pope Francis about who God is he said, God is the God of another possibility. And I think when you're thinking about that claim in the context of as a theological claim in response to the way that data is aggregated and then normalized by these kind of AI-based systems, there's a lack of respect for the kind of diversity of possibilities that exist in the world, that theologically, as Christians, we can actually contribute to the conversation about how these technologies operate. That maybe, I haven't read Davison's work, but maybe he draws on something similar, that there's something to the plethora of wisdom in the world that is core to creation and core to how God interacts with us as distinctive relational human beings, as Noreen kind of emphasized, that is not necessarily as conducive to even the technical structure of how these systems tend to operate.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting how often in news sources you get them talking about, we're building God here. And by that, often they mean something which is powerful, right? And yet it makes us think about the transcendental of omnipotence. And we're like, is that Christian power? Is that
Mhm.
is that the way we kind of see it? But that is our natural religious kind of intuition around those kind of conceptions of power as well. That was certainly something I was just thinking about. Noreen, what you were going to come in?
Michael, yeah, I want to come back to what you said about de-skilling,
Yeah.
because I see this de-skilling happening on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Certainly in academia, where there's a big concern right now that our students, by using ChatGPT to write their papers, are not going to be developing their own skills with language. They're not going to be developing their own skills with deep reading. They're not going to be developing critical thinking.
Yeah.
Um, but as you mentioned too, um, we're also not going to be developing a whole host of spiritual skills. And I think of that, and I think about how with AI, we tend to be putting speed at the
Yeah.
forefront. We tend to be putting um, novelty at the forefront. Not that it's anything really new, but I think about how, for example, when you go back to the Catholic Mass, how important it is that I was once in Ireland where I think Father had something he needed to go to, and he just rushed through the Mass in like 20 minutes. That wasn't the Mass. I mean, you need space. You hopefully need openings for meditation. You need repetition because the repetition in and of itself can take you out of the realm of words and into this realm of presence.
Mm.
And I really fear that, particularly with large language models that just live completely in the realm of words,
Mm.
that we're losing
Mm.
sight of the fact that we need to slow down, that we need to make space for being more meditative in our work, in our relationships with each other.
Mhm.
And that we need to sometimes get out of the realm of words, whether it's getting into the physical realm of touch with one another, or whether it's getting into that mental, contemplative presence of God that goes beyond our words.
Mm.
I want to give others a chance to jump in here if anybody has comments or questions for the panel or others. And Gemma?
Thank you. For some reason, my video, I don't know what's happening. It shows that my video is supposed to be working, but it's not working. So
That's
sorry that you
okay.
can't see me.
We
Yeah,
can hear
I
you.
was really intrigued and captured by the point there about this person who submitted his work for publication and acknowledged AI, I was just thinking that if I was teaching a class and a student in the footnotes, acknowledge, material from AI, how was I going to treat that? Because in my school, we're using the manuals, using, Chicago manual for style, really does not make space for that. I hope eventually some revision will be done. But I was just thinking within me, if a student would acknowledge that, it looks to me like something plausible. Uh, and so it's just thoughts going through my mind. I'm just keen to hear what others will say. In the case of the book never made it through. But in the case of an academic paper, where a student would say, just like you would acknowledge, I got this material from this author, and there was this idea, there was this thought I got from AI. I'm not sure which author is that. AI may be getting from other sources, but at least I acknowledge that this is not my idea, So I'm just wondering, what will I make of that? Will I say, you get out this material? Will I say that was well done? What do others think about that?
Mhm. So I went back and forth with my other co-editor for quite some time. We're actually both on a similar project at Oxford, where we're developing an oath for engineers, a little bit like the Hippocratic oath that engineers might take to meet the kind of vocational realities of artificial intelligence. And we kind of talked about the 4 different ways that they mentioned that they used it and what were the points at which we thought the different levels might be the most dubious or acceptable. And I mean, well, first of all, would you want to use it in the first place? In the same kind of way that, like, should we be using the scientific findings that Nazis, right, in their sciences used? So in using it in the first place, you're already making some kind of evaluative moral judgment, right? So there's that. And which one you select, you might actually be using, which particular kind of model, right? So by using it, am I somehow tacitly affirming that, yep, ChatGPT stole a bunch of stuff from the New York Times, and I'm somehow benefiting from that, but they themselves don't want to pay the money for that kind of work, right? So you have that whole host of issues. But then if you bracket that and you say, okay, all things considered, I'm okay with this, at what level, is it helping you to find primary sources as if it's like kind of search engine that's better? Okay, if it's pointing me to primary resources, maybe that's okay, but is it biased in what it's going to be selecting? Will it hallucinate those resources? So long as you go and find out those things, is that good enough? To me, that the thing that seemed the hardest part, even if you attribute ChatGPT or whatever the LLM you choose is, when it came to like brainstorming, because if it's aggregating ideas from others that itself either isn't letting you know where it comes from or you can't attribute, or in other words, you can't see inside the black box, then the person who's actually doing the knowledge production still isn't being attributed for those particular things. And if it's just a blanket, oh, I use this, well, how much did you use it and in what areas? What do I know is your work versus was it mostly in chapter 1? Was it over the entirety of it? So it struck me that you've got different levels of its usage that I think on a case-by-case basis you have to kind of consider. How else would anybody else have intuitions about? Was it like, no, we need to just not let it happen?
I mean, I'm currently teaching undergraduates right now, and we've had a couple of different conversations, both because of my research and because of, assignments that have been submitted that have clearly involved them using generative AI to produce particular responses. And I think to Noreen's point and your point, Michael, about de-skilling more generally, something that I emphasize in the classroom in a theology class for whom most of the students are not theology majors and who will not go on to take more theology courses in the future, that the purpose of the course is to build kinds of critical thinking and reading and writing that they won't get in their STEM classes where they're being evaluated on factual recall of the structure of particular molecules. And in fact, that the theological task involves asking big questions that have sometimes very incomplete or dissatisfying answers, and that's something that's also not necessarily part of the other intellectual formation that's happening in their professional kind of formation in academia. And so one of the realities there is that then assignment design needs to change at the undergraduate level, recognizing that undergraduates many of them will have access to these tools and the kinds of choices that they have to make around whether they're going to use them for their assignments and submit work that's involved use of ChatGPT those conversations need to be preempted at the very beginning of whatever kind of classroom you're operating in. And also, like, this is a conversation that can be happening in a bunch of different contexts. There have been a number of Vatican offices on their social media platforms that have put out images to go along with nice words that have been generated by large models that are missed opportunities to pay artists for human generated work, right? And so there's a constant tension and an opportunity for conversation that's not yet part of a public consciousness around engagement with these tools. But the more that it happens, the more opportunity there is to reaffirm what would be these relational values or values of authentic encounter in Noreen's world around what we consider to be ways of being human together that we want to retain or to preserve despite the capacities of these tools.
So what do you make of those that, they won the AI large, the LMMs, and then they will run them through the humanizing models to take away some of the AI characteristics of their assignments and use those. What's the future of that? How do we manage those kind of things with AI and other things that are coming out? Any thoughts on that?
My thought is that we need to go back to more face-to-face encounter, and that includes evaluation of our students. And I have a number of colleagues who are simply moving to oral examinations, feeling that that is the only way that you can actually see what's been internalized by the student.
Books.
My hope is that maybe as AI starts to infiltrate more and more of our society, we will come to recognize our great need for, as Karl Barth says, the first part of any authentic relationship is to look the other in the eye. And that we will come to recognize that is an imperative, because otherwise, A, you don't know who you're speaking to. There is no privacy online. And B, you don't know who is speaking back to you. Because as we've already said with ChatGPT, we don't know the sources of the information that it is giving. And if you ask it to give sources, a large percentage of the time, it will just make things up. So if we are eventually going to really know to whom we speak and who speaks to us, we will have to look the other in the eye.
There's a really great piece on church life that a good friend and colleague Jeffrey Bishop at St. Louis University wrote on bringing back medieval disputations with AI, which I thought was a really interesting idea, especially in a kind of theological context where an AI is one of the interlocutors that you then have to kind of critique. And you've got different people who have different, reply one, objection, whatever else. You should take a look at that. It's very interesting.
Well, we're nearly reaching the end of our time, unless we have one more question. Anyone? No? All right, well, let's thank our panelists.